Hi there, everybody. Thanks for joining us here today. I'm Al Pulowski, the voice of the CSU men's basketball team, joined by athletic director Scott Garrett from Cleveland State. And Scott, how are you holding up in these strange times of ours right now?
Well, strange is probably the right way to put it. Certainly unprecedented. Holding up okay. Appreciate you asking. It is good to see you, Al. It's been a while since
Yeah,
we've been together, probably all the way back to Indianapolis or before that even.
right.
So
Yeah.
always nice to see you, and hope you and your family are doing well too. We're hanging in there.
hmm
We're dealing with the cards we're dealt right now as best we can, and certainly trying to finish out the academic year strong, and making plans and preparations for what the 2020-21 academic and sports seasons will look like. So a lot of planning going on. Department's still at work, and getting to at least enjoy the time with my family.
That's good to hear. Yeah, we're holding up okay here, but boy, it is different. Can't wait to see you in person again, and especially at a CSU athletic event. And it's your 1 year anniversary now. Congratulations on that. And you've had a lot to do. You had to hire multiple new coaches, such as Dennis Gates. You've had to deal with COVID-19, which nobody could have seen coming. So here on your 1 year anniversary, Scott, kind of give me your analysis with where you're at and how you feel you've done so far here in your first year at Cleveland State.
Yeah, it's certainly been a year of memorable events, so to speak. So, I had a chance the last couple of days to go back and look at some photos from the introductory press conference, and look back on some of the memories that really seemed like they were just yesterday in some ways, but seemed like they were years ago in other ways. And it's good to reflect. There's some things about those first couple weeks that I really have enjoyed thinking back on about how we got started, and the pace that we were working at really early. To transition 6 head coaches in the first few weeks
Yeah.
and months, to have turned over naturally turned over about half of the department's positions, and really reshaped and restructured the staff in the first few weeks was a monumental effort by a number of people, not just me and my leadership, but a lot of people throughout the university and throughout the department that helped make our early success really possible. And then you look at the latest challenges, right? What the end of February and into the early March end of basketball season looked like, and what hit us was nothing that any of us expected to go day by day, where the situation just changed so drastically from we're gonna finish out the basketball season to we're gonna keep our spring student athletes on campus and let them finish out their seasons even with no fans in the stands for some of our sports, to
Right.
canceling the NIC swimming meet in the middle of that meet and shutting down all of our spring sports. And then, to have Chris Kielsmeyer, the head women's basketball coach, unfortunately get infected with COVID-19, and to manage through that and all the appropriate things that we had to do in response to that, and get to see his recovery. It's been a whirlwind, and you probably wouldn't have drawn it up this way a year ago, but we've learned a lot. I think we've had a lot that we can point to that show the momentum of the university and how the department fits into that. We got a long way to go, so we're anxious to get back on campus at some point soon and get back to work.
Yeah, you brought up Coach Kielsmeyer, and I had the chance to text with him a few times, and seeing how he's doing. And boy, he really went through a tough time, and still, as of this day, not 100% recovered yet. Great to see that he's going to be okay, and that's the most important thing. But that hit very close to home, and he was one of the first people in Cleveland that was diagnosed with a positive COVID-19. So in some ways, he's a trailblazer, and now that he's been through this, he can provide a resource as to what it's like to go through it.
Yeah, it was certainly very scary when he called as just a couple days after their season ended, and said that he wasn't feeling well, and started to describe his symptoms, and then got a test, and then that test came back positive. And sort of the action plan that we had, both from an athletic department and his personal medical situation, and what that meant for the university, were all things that nobody's ever dealt with before, and definitely put a human element to the disease. Right at that point,
Yeah.
none of us had any personal experience dealing with that, other than the early stories that we're hearing in the news. And I think it spoke volumes about Chris's leadership, his willingness to come forward as to put a face on that disease and show how it affected Cleveland and Cleveland State and our athletics department, and allowed us to tackle it in a way that really was proactive and kept people from, getting sick themselves. But it definitely gives you perspective that, as we talk about reopening and getting people back to work and back on campus, the experience that Chris went through gives you, and others, certainly those that have lost their lives or have been really severely impacted by the disease, it gives you pause to really make sure we're thoughtful about any decisions that we make in terms of, how quickly we get back to any sense of normalcy. We need to make sure we do the right thing so that people can avoid having the experience that Chris did or worse.
So with that, Scott, obviously we're all working from home in one way or another. We're able to have these sorts of videos and TV shows from home too. You've got a routine from home as well. So take us through that routine and how you engage your staff and coaches and student athletes during this time when there's just no face-to-face contact.
Yeah, definitely an interesting adjustment, although I think we evolved into this world just like everyone, pretty quickly. It's fortunate that we have the technology to really keep things moving at the pace that they're moving, to have the ability to talk to one another, to see one another on video, to share files and talk about plans. The department's really still clicking in a number of ways. Our teams are having team meetings with their student athletes on a weekly basis. Head coaches are meeting with their staffs pretty regularly. I am on a daily pandemic crisis call with university leadership, where we talk about how the pandemic is affecting CSU broadly, and planning what our return to campus might look like at some point in the future, and how that all impacts all the various moving parts of the university. From an athletics perspective, we've met with I meet with the senior staff, our associate and ADs and up once a week. I've called all our head coaches a couple times to check in and see how they're doing. I know a lot of our individual units are meeting, like, the marketing team and student athlete services. Our academic advisors are probably the busiest people in the department. We've got a couple weeks left plus finals here in the spring semester, and that transition of our students from what they would normally be doing on campus to totally remote learning and getting through the end of their semester in a successful way really can only be done with the help of a number of folks in our wraparound services that have gone above and beyond to really adjust in this environment. So happy and pleased and proud of the way the department's responded.
Yeah, it's nice to see the way everybody's been able to work together through this. And I think, when you try to look for silver linings, that's one of those. As an athletic department, Scott, how has it evolved during this time?
Yeah, a great question. I think early on, our discussions were sort of the short-term issues that we had to deal with, right? How do we get student athletes off campus? What's the right way to direct them to make sure they know where to go? It changed every day. Like I mentioned earlier, we went from thinking that, hey, we're going to play lacrosse and Evan Cheek's going to go finish out the wrestling season, and we're going to play men's and women's tennis and golf and track, and to shut all those things down within the course of 48 hours, unwind those, make sure that the student athletes have the right counsel from the support staff and from their coaches, that they have the right direction on what it meant in the transition to online learning. And then some, medium-term impacts. We talk about NCAA revenue distribution, and that really getting cut into a third of what we would normally expect, and how does that affect, closing out this fiscal year's budget and starting up next fiscal year's budget. We've had a lot of discussion on the return of the student athletes that lost their spring season, that have the opportunity to return for next year, and I know we'll talk about that a little bit more in depth. And now it's evolved to, okay, how do we plan for what Cleveland State athletics looks like moving forward? So digging back into, marketing planning for next basketball season, and planning for when student athletes do return in the fall. What are the activities that we'll have? And then, as we launch our strategic plan, the department strategic plan we've worked on for 12 months, we still have a milestone marker in front of us in the next few weeks to put that out publicly, and making sure we put the finishing touches on that and get the right set of eyes on it to make sure it's buttoned up and ready to go and be distributed publicly. So, it's evolved from short-term issues to some things that impact us over the next few months to much longer-term planning back into a rhythm of what's this department going to look like and how do we move forward from this.
You talked a little bit too about how the coaches dealing with their athletes and, of course, the academic advisors, they've been quite busy during this time. What does that look like for a student athlete, their remote learning experience and their training and practice too? Because, we in MLB, that's all they have to be concerned with, for example. Professional athletes, they just worry about staying in shape for their sport. But as a student athlete, you've got to balance academics with athletics. They kind of have to still do both right now, don't they?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Certainly the athletic piece has dialed back a little bit. Our strength coaches have shared some suggested workouts that student athletes can do on a voluntary basis specific to their sport. And I know that our student athletes, most of them and many of them are really committed to make sure they stay prepared for whatever their next, season looks like. And, to balance that with being stuck in your house with taking classes and those are all delivered in maybe different ways. And maybe a little bit inconsistency in each class in terms of, what your professor's doing in terms of delivery, which those have all been great. The feedback from our student athletes and students in general across campus has been very positive that CSU has done an unbelievable job of shifting to this new model of delivery, hopefully a temporary delivery of classes. But and then, they're evaluating decisions like, should I take classes pass fail or get a grade in this class? How does that impact any application I might have for grad school in the future? Or what does that look like for their future academic endeavors? And so the biggest takeaway is that we still need to be here as a resource for our student athletes. Our strength coaches and trainers need to be available. Our academic advisors and compliance need to be available. Our coaches and our administration need to be available in a proactive way, that we're answering all the questions that our student athletes have, we're keeping them on track, and that we're prepared to have a seamless transition when they do come back to campus.
As far as recruiting goes then, Scott, that's a bit of a challenge now too. During basketball season, a lot of times we have coaches flying all over the country. Then they'll, some of the assistants won't travel with us. They'll meet us at the games and they'll go back out on another recruiting trip. We just saw the latest that I saw from Rivals had, it's a little bit of a fluid situation. The Cleveland State's men's basketball recruiting class is number 81, tops in the Horizon League, one of the top recruiting classes mid-major wise in the entire country. Number 4 in the state of Ohio, which is above some programs that maybe had even a more storied history than Cleveland State. So, Scott, Dennis Gates is getting it done, but how is he and the other coaches getting it done during this challenging time?
Yeah, specific to men's basketball, those guys did a ton of work in the late summer and fall after this year's recruiting class shaped up to build the 1920 roster. Coach and his staff went to work to get some early commitments, and I think we had 4 commitments in the fall, which is huge for a program at this level to have that really buttoned up in the fall. And then as we manage the roster moving forward, to have a couple spots open late to be able to get a local product committed to our team, and certainly some additional help. To only have 2 scholarships to manage in the spring was a little bit better than having all of them, which some programs out there have a plethora of open spots to deal with during this. It's been hard generally for all of our sports. It's what the NCAA calls a dead period, and so phone calls are permitted, but no travel, no in-person evaluation. Up until the signing day last week, no signing of financial aid agreements or national letters of intent, and so a totally different environment. In the late recruiting period, you've got student athletes that are visiting virtually with coaches that maybe have never been to campus before, and they're making that decision. And I think maybe some of our coaches leaned on some of our tennis coaches because they deal with that all the time, right? They recruit somewhat internationally and sometimes have commitments from student athletes that have never been to Cleveland or Cleveland State. And I know our coaches really leaned on each other to, what are videos out there that show what Cleveland State's all about, what the experience is going to be like. We've been, our team our communications team and marketing team have been very proactive about sharing content about what's a Cleveland State student athlete experience look like, and got those in the hands of our coaches so that they could help translate that as best as possible as students were making their decisions. But I know our coaches would certainly prefer that in-person contact and building the relationships and doing that over a longer term than what we've dealt with over the last couple months. But we did pretty well considering the circumstances.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, men's basketball is getting some great pub out of it. So that's truly a good thing for Cleveland State. Scott, you talked a little bit about, financially, how a lot of the grant money from the NCAA is obviously not going to be what it has been in years past, simply because there's no events going on right now. So, financially, how has that impacted the department with this pandemic and everything being shut down right now?
Yeah, we typically in a calendar year get about $500,000 from the NCAA through a variety of funds that they operate. That has been reduced to about $280,000. So, that'll be a significant impact on the department. Some of that in this fiscal year, some of it in next. And we're still working with university leadership on exactly, the accounting of that and how it impacts us to close out this fiscal year and open up next. We did save some money to close out this fiscal year, really because our spring sports didn't travel to the trips that they intended. So, I think, in regards to FY20, we're in okay shape. I think we can balance this year's budget. But as we get started for FY21 and start to look at that first, to deal with the drawback of NCAA revenues is something that we'll have to manage. We're certainly visiting with the conference office as well in terms of, how can they collectively help the member institutions and help mitigate some of that. But then, we have to anticipate what enrollment might look like and what are some of the other budget challenges we might face. And so our senior staff has really spent a lot of proactive time visiting about what are ways that we can get more efficient and more effective, even if it's just a short-term balancing act. And hopefully it is that we can get back to a normal sense of operating in the future. But there are certainly some impacts that we haven't made decisions yet, but decisions will come in the near future about, how do we respond to some of the challenges that we face from a financial perspective.
And Scott, with that too, since there are no spring sports, the NCAA granted spring sports student athletes another year of eligibility. So how is CSU managing that? Because the spring kids could come back for another season and compete next year. Of course, they'd still have to be students at Cleveland State. But right now, obviously things could change, Scott. But right now, how are things looking with that? How is it going to look next spring?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we had, I think, about 25 student athletes across golf, tennis, lacrosse, track and field that were affected, and softball that were affected by that cancellation that could come back. We have polled those student athletes, both the coaches and the administrators of those sports have polled those student athletes. We think there's about 15 of those 25 that would come back, that would want to come back. A number of those would come back only if their full aid package was available. Some would come back if there was some modification, and then a fewer amount would come back if we were able to provide nothing. They would just come back because, they really want to and can do it without that financial assistance. So the total of that, of bringing back those 15 on the same scholarship that they had this year, is about $175,000 spend. And so, and certainly, as revenues go down and expenses like that go up, the numbers are going in the wrong direction on both sides. And that's not an ideal situation. Right now, we certainly wouldn't be able to come up with $175,000 without getting really creative. And so that's what the staff is studying now. Are there funds available through the foundation, through external donors, through some of our restricted fundraising accounts? Are there existing scholarship budgets available in some of our sports that they have not committed to the 2021 roster? And so, probably, if we're able to do something, it'll come from a variety of different sources. We're hoping to have a final answer on that for each individual student athlete in the next couple weeks and be able to communicate that. And so, broadly, no, there's not a pile of $175,000 sitting around that we can just say, yep, please come back and here's your scholarship. We're going to have to get creative while we look at other areas of the department and how we operate more efficiently. So we hope to provide some sort of path back for all 15 of those student athletes, but more yet to come on that.
And then also, Scott, as an aside, I had a couple people ask me this just this week. They said, well, for spring baseball, for example, or softball in Cleveland State scenario, could scholarship numbers be increased because you're going to have these kids coming back, or does it look like it's going to be the same scholarship number per sport?
Yeah, so right now the NCAA's legislation or the language that they approved for us is that on a 1-year basis, those seniors could come back and we could exceed what the maximum allowable aid distribution is. That's just a 1-year waiver. So then moving forward, you would fall back and coaches would need to manage the roster up to either what the NCAA allows, or for some of our sports we're a couple scholarships lower than that from a financial perspective. So we would manage that with each coach on a sport by sport basis based on either NCAA regulations or their budget.
Scott, you're in constant contact with the NCAA, with other athletic directors, with presidents. You guys are having your meetings during the day virtually like we are here and talking about it. From a whole perspective, how is this affecting collegiate athletics, where obviously Cleveland State doesn't have to worry about football, for example? A lot of other institutions do. But in general, how is this affecting the college athletic landscape?
Yeah, I mean, lots of big picture discussion, right? Of what does this mean financially for different departments? What are their short-term reactions, and then what's the lasting impact? The shorter-term questions are really the fall sports, and that's at the moment really driven by the return to football, as those student athletes at various institutions look to come back in July or August. What's the possibility that there will be consistency with that? And whether that season will have to be, pushed off or delayed or reduced. And that will start to trickle into our other fall sports. And so for us, what does volleyball and men's and women's soccer look like? What does cross country look like? And, we're certainly studying that, exactly what, the impact on the 2020-21 season is. But it is a time to, I think, reinvent. And so that's what a lot of administrations and leadership are doing all over the country, both, from a national organizational perspective, from a conference perspective, and then down to each individual institution, right? Questions like, how much are you willing to travel for games? How big should those rosters be? How many coaches should be on a coaching staff versus what we have now? And again, as I've mentioned earlier, we haven't made any decisions. There's been very few institutions out there that are at decision points, but they're all of my counterparts are having the same conversations that we're having as a staff about what is the short and long-term impact of this pandemic situation. And we'll come out the other end of it fine. We might look a little bit different, but our goal is still provide student athletes with a transformational student athlete experience, have our staff invest in their development as people and students and athletes. And that promise that we make to our student athletes when they commit to Cleveland State is not going to change. But the way we deliver that might have to be adjusted moving forward.
And finally, Scott, milestone wise, what's the next one we can look for college athletics, or more specifically Cleveland State? Is there, a certain date or period that fans can look forward to and say, okay, when this date happens, we'll know more about X?
Yeah, that one's tough to answer. I think it'll look a little bit different in different areas of the country. It'll certainly depend on availability of testing and any enhanced treatments that might become available for the disease, and certainly what hotspots look like at various places in the country. I've been sharing with our staff and with others that I've talked to that, look, it's April, and August and September is a long way away. A lot can change between now and then. I don't know that it would be fair to set up a milestone marker date to say, if we have communicated or not communicated an update by this date, that necessarily means, one thing or another. We're all hopeful that we can return back to some level of normalcy, that students can come back on campus in the fall, and that student athletes can participate in their sports. But if we get to a point in the summer where that becomes less and less optimistic and possible, then certainly we'll make adjustments from there, and we'll treat everybody in a fair way and communicate it out in a way that's professional and thoughtful.
Scott, thanks so much for your time here today. Let's make these a regular occurrence until we can get together face to face. Then we don't have to do this anymore. How does that sound?
Yeah, absolutely. Glad to connect back with you. Hopefully our fans are enjoying watching all our CSU athletics social media accounts, and going to csuvikings.com, where we continue to post regular updates and celebrate the different things that are happening in the athletics program. So thanks for everybody's support, and we hope to see you back on campus soon.
All right, very good. There he is, Athletic Director Scott Garrett from Cleveland State. I'm Al Pulowski. Thanks for joining us here today.